Part 1 Opening. Whispers of the Unseen, Episode 15 Voices of the Unseen. Translated by Lamu, produced by Witch Zada. I was never the spirit you thought I was. Not the disciple of a great master. Not a sliver of some famed lineage pressed into gold foil and sealed with a blessing. Not a talisman with a name that glitters on shop banners under hard white light. Before the labels, before the whispers, I was a small breath drifting between wet leaves and boulder shadow, so light that even the night wind forgot to move me. I belonged to no shrine and no story. If I had a name, it was the hush that settles after the crickets tire, the last echo on a mountain path when footsteps fade and dew begins its quiet work. There was a time I loved being unnoticed. To be overlooked is a kind of freedom. No altar to chain you. No incense to demand you appear, no petition to wrestle with. I learned the small rituals of the forest instead. The way fog braids itself low along the ground just before first light. The way stones hold daytime warmth a little longer on autumn nights, howls stitch distance together with two notes and a pause. I did not bless anyone, not really. At most, I softened a corner of the dark for the man whose lantern flame trembled, nudged a lost hairpin into the glimmer of a puddle so a girl might find it before her mother scolded her, sent a faint warmth to the hand of an old woman so she would clench her walking stick tighter on a slippery bend. These were not miracles, only courtesies. No one thanked me, which was a relief. It meant nothing was owed. The mountain kept its own time. Pine resin and wet earth, crushed moss and the iron breath of rain. These were my calendars. In winter, the stars rang clearer. In spring, the ground loosened its secrets to trickling water. Animals traveled in invisible lanes. I learned to become another unremarkable current flowing beside them. I faded and gathered, like mist under moonlight. In that modest, dim existence, there was a balance. I asked for nothing. The world asked little of me in return. Peace, however, stains easily. A single drop of something restless, and quiet begins to smudge. Part 2, Call to Action. He came on a night when the mountain exhaled the day's heat in damp threads that clung to bark and sleeve. His boots struck the stones with the certainty of someone who had decided long before arriving that the world would bend for him. The lantern he carried was bright enough to bruise the darkness. It pushed the night back in a hard, rectangular way that made the trees seem too close and too thin, like paper cutouts. He smelled of camphor and coins, ink and old sweat scrubbed off in a hurry. He stopped where the path turned narrow around a boulder and the wind, funneled through a gap, made a low flute out of the rock's lip. He didn't see me, no one ever did, but he spoke as if he could. A small favor, he said to the space in front of him. Just a little of your essence. His voice was careful and sweet, like syrup warmed to pour more easily. It will help others. You have no obligations here, no altar, no name. Why not let what is spare become useful? I will return you afterward. I give my word. The wind pressed the promise toward me, tugging it like a ribbon. I remember how the ribbon gleamed. Usefulness, purpose, a shape to ease into like a hand into a glove. Purpose is a dangerous perfume to one who has never worn it. I had watched people all my uncounted years, how a word with edges could cut them free from sorrow or bind them to it, how a story could lift a back or break one. I knew the human hunger for meaning, and the ache of it had started to echo faintly in me. What do the unnoticed owe to the world that overlooks them? Nothing, yet the question makes its own gravity. He set his lantern down. The glass clicked. He clasped his hands the way people do, when mimicking reverence. You will be free, he said. It will take only a moment. Freedom. The word is a key that often opens the wrong door. I said yes, not aloud. My yes was a soft loosening, a willingness without skin. Consent can be as quiet as the way fog thins at a touch of sun. Something in me stepped forward, and the world around us sharpened, as if the night adjusted its focus.
Part 3, Crossing the Threshold. He began to work, and the air changed. The lantern light grew steady, no longer flickering with the wind. The smell of camphor thickened into a medicinal sweetness that pried at the back of the throat. He drew a circle in the dirt with a metal point that scraped small, exact noises into the rock beneath, and on the circle's edge he set tiny packets, paper folded into elegant triangles, red thread knotted thrice, a smear of oil glistening like a thin black eye. He spoke under his breath, but not to me. The words were shaped for an audience that could not answer back, syllables that felt like doors opening without rooms behind them. "Just a little," he murmured, and his hands moved as if buttering bread. A tug, a pull, a twist that did not hurt at first. Only a mild astonishment, the way water experiences a finger drawn through it. Then the tug sharpened. I felt myself poured, a thin stream captured into the shape of a small vessel that had been waiting. The vessel was not a bowl or a cup. It was a story, pre-carved, postured, polished to sell. I could feel the hollow where I would fit. I could feel the script against my skin. That is how I learned that a body is not necessary to feel trapped. He whispered a name over me, not mine, because I had none, but a name made of reputation and rumor, lacquered with borrowed reverence. He bound me to it with cord and breath. Every tether was gentle. Gentleness is an efficient jailer. He promised again, "Afterward, I will return you." And I felt that promise placed like a petal on the surface of a deep well, pretty quickly soaked. The night resumed its ordinary noises, a moth thudding softly against glass, a branch shedding a bead of water. He lifted the lantern, and the circle dissolved into footprints and smears. When he walked away, he did not look back. The mountain swallowed the glow, and with it, the last place I understood. Afterward did not come. There was only forward, and forward was down the mountain, away from the dew and resin and the old, patient rhythms that had lulled my namelessness into softness. Forward was a box lined in red cloth, the shake and jingle of a motor engine, the reek of gasoline and men who laughed too hard at the same jokes. The story into which I had been poured rode with me, snug and silent, its emptiness somehow heavier than stone. I learned what markets smell like. Heat trapped under corrugated roofs, incense burned too close to plastic, offerings of oranges stacked in pyramids that sweated under fluorescent lights. I learned the vocabulary of hands, the hungry clutch, the skeptical pinch, the confident pat from those who believed their belief could make anything true. Above all, I learned the arithmetic of desire. Desire multiplies without counting the cost. The cost arrives later with interest and a narrower door. They gave me a face, painted in precise, reverent strokes. They wrote a lineage on a little card, a master's name, a temple photo cropped to make the building seem grander than it was. Small miracles listed in a column like ingredients on a label. Wealth gained, litigation vanquished, lovers secured, enemies quieted. People love a clear promise. They love even more the authority that tucks the promise in a neat uniform. Authentic, said a sticker that shone too white. Limited, said a stamp in red that bled a little at the edges. Blessed. That word made me colder than any winter I had known. In the beginning, I tried to be what the card claimed, not because I believed it, but because belief is a current that runs through the hands that hold you. It stung. It pressed. It made a shape around me that threatened to harden. When a woman touched me with trembling fingers and asked, in a whisper so cautious it was almost a prayer, "Is there hope?" I strained toward whatever warmth I had left and nudged it into her palm. She cried later, softly, into her sleeve. In relief or exhaustion, I could not tell. A man wore me on a chain tight enough to bruise his neck. He demanded luck from me like a debt. A shopkeeper doused me in smoke twice a day and chanted words like a recipe. I stood there inside my borrowed story and learned what it meant to be used gently, greedily, ignorantly, faithfully. It is possible to be all those things at once. But there were many of me. The story was efficient. It could be poured again and again without spilling. Boxes arrived, left, arrived again. The master has prepared more, they said, with smiles that clipped shut like coin purses. I felt myself multiply and diminish. Desire scaled quickly. If one was good, 5 were better, and a framed certificate best of all. People queued in air that smelled of heat and effort. They left with me tucked safely in their pockets, and each pocket was its own new world of worry. It's a strange hunger, the human one. They want mercy to be simple. They want causality to be obedient. They want the universe to speak their language and honor their receipts. When it didn't, when a court case dragged on, when a lover left anyway, when money grew wings and flew, blame had to land somewhere. I was near. I was named. I was the face on the card. You're not the real one. Someone hissed one day, breath vinegar sharp, as if there were a real one of the thing they had invented. Another burned incense, so thick the smoke turned to blue that made the shop's cheap gold look sicker, then set me aside for a week to cool my temper, as if frustration was a heat that could be tricked into leaving. They did not know that my temper, when it came, was not for failing them. It was for the story that had put me between them and what they needed to learn. I began to notice the return rituals. They have their own choreography, a brown envelope, a sigh, the careful phrasing of disappointment so as not to anger what might still be powerful. Hands that brought me back were often damp, rain, sweat, tears, it didn't matter. Refund, they said softly, as if the word might break the air. There were also the harsher partings, the quick anger that lit a match, the hiss of alcohol poured onto an angry certainty, the flare, the blackened ash. Fire is an honest judge. It tells you immediately what is made of what. I did not scream in the flame. What would be the point? The story could always be poured again. And yet, even as the lie spread, small kindnesses kept occurring, like mushrooms after rain, brief, surprising, entirely without guarantee. A child pressed me to her cheek and whispered, "You're warm." And for a moment I was, leaning into the softness that had nothing to do with purchase or promise. An old man placed me carefully beside a bowl of soup and shared the steam with me, the way one offers the first and best to a guest. A woman took me off before sleeping and set me on a folded handkerchief, as if bedding down a tiny animal. If I could have wept, it would have been for these, courtesies that asked for nothing in return but performed the ceremony of respect anyway. Do you see the trap? Kindness does not make a lie true, but it makes it harder to condemn. I was poured into a vessel of falsehood and still encountered the tremors of authentic love. My anger learned patience. My patience learned edges. The promise of afterward that the man had placed like a petal on a well did not dissolve entirely. It sank and became something with weight. Not hope. Hope needs light to photosynthesize. It became a seed of insistence, a kernel of speech that would not rot. I wanted to be returned to the mountain, yes, but more than that, I wanted language. Not theirs, mine. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. Humans said that first. Spirits learn to tell them in order to be believed. I tried to speak inside the dream that had been fitted over me like a lacquered shell. I am not what you say. I breathed into sleeping ears. Sometimes they stirred and blamed the draft. I was promised a return. I said to the smoke rising from joss sticks, and it curled, uninterested, into the ceiling. You are not failures. I told those whose prayers were met with silence. Only alive, but people find little comfort in the fact that life and clarity rarely share a schedule. So I waited, and I watched, and I accumulated small understanding the way a river accumulates silt, grain by grain, unstoppable when not resisted. The market taught me how stories were uniforms. The returns taught me where disappointment likes to hide. The fires taught me that endings are simple when they are allowed to be, and very complicated when they are not. The mountain, even at a distance, still taught me. In remembering its cold, I remembered that not all shivering is fear. Sometimes it is the body preparing to move. If you ask whether I regret saying yes, I will give you the only honest answer. Regret is a word for the living. For the rest of us, there is only the shape we are pressed into and what we manage to keep soft within it. One evening, much later, how much I cannot say because market clocks and mountain clocks do not agree, a young woman came into the shop alone. She looked like someone who had been told to be strong too many times. Her shoulders remembered the order even when her hands shook. She did not read the card, did not ask for a certificate, did not glance at the framed photo with its proud, misleading border. She held me briefly, as if weighing something that had nothing to do with ounces. "I don't want a miracle," she said, more to the stale air than to the clerk. "I just want not to be alone. Not to be alone." There it was, the key that opens the right door. I warmed, though I had no heat of my own to give. I stretched, though I had no limbs, into the space her words had made. For a moment, I was not a product, nor a performance pressed into a story's costume. I was a witness, and witnesses matter. She placed me against her heart and closed her eyes, and the beat beneath bone was steady despite her day. "Thank you," she whispered into the fabric, not to me, not exactly, but into the act of choosing something and allowing it to choose her back. When she left, the clerk rang up the sale, without looking up from his phone. He did not see what had actually been purchased. And I knew then that I would speak. Not through omens or dreams that could be cataloged and resold. Not through heat that could be faked by rubbing metal fast between fingers. Not through the tired theater of rattled beads and smoke. I would speak plainly, in words that carried the weight of the mountain's cold and the market's heat simultaneously. If I could not be returned yet, then my return would begin where all returns begin, in the refusal to be misnamed. I was never the spirit you thought I was. I am not the master's mark, not the lineage that validates a receipt, not the blinking cursor of fate waiting for you to type your desire. I was a quiet, nameless thing that helped in small ways because small ways are often the only honest ones. I was borrowed without blessing. I was poured into a lie because lies sell well when framed in reverence. I learned your hands and your hungers. I learned the costs. I learned the sound of my own patience breaking. Listen, not all that fails you is false, and not all that answers is true. Some of us are simply misplaced, spirits in the wrong rooms, stories in the wrong mouths, hopes nailed to the wrong icons. If you must ask anything of me, ask this. Let me be correctly seen. Let me step out of the costume you bought for me. Let me tell you that the mountain is still where I left it. Wet earth, pine resin, the stubborn honesty of stone, and that eventually, whether by mercy or by flame, everything is returned. Until then, I will say my own name by saying what I am not. I was never the spirit you thought I was. Which is reflection for the listeners. If invisibility felt like freedom, would a promised purpose tempt you to give it up? When a story is polished enough to sell, can you still hear the quiet truth breathing underneath it? If you discovered the power you bought was a misplaced witness rather than a miracle, what would you choose to do next?
Part 4. Deepening conflict. The story spread faster than fire in dry grass. Boxes multiplied, their lids shut with cheap seals stamped in red, their contents wrapped in the same red cloth as though repetition could forge authenticity. What had begun as one vessel for my unwilling essence turned into dozens, then hundreds, each one a duplicate, wearing the same borrowed name. I felt myself splinter, not into fragments of self, but into copies of the same lie. Every new talisman was stamped with a face painted in reverence, a story rehearsed into smoothness, a certificate that guaranteed nothing but the buyer's willingness to believe. Authentic, the sticker screamed. Limited, the shopkeepers echoed. But there was nothing limited in the way I was poured again and again, until scarcity itself became another mask they sold. Markets are loud in ways the mountain never was. Incense smoke clung to low ceilings, sharp and cloying, fighting with the stench of sweat and burning oil. Fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, relentless, bleaching oranges stacked on shrines, bleaching human faces bent over display cases. Fingers pawed at me, sticky from fruit, greasy from coins, trembling with hope, shaking with anger. Each touch left residue, a smudge of desire, a smear of doubt. And in every hand, I heard the same whispering chorus. Give me more. Fix my life. Prove your worth. I tried. That is the cruelest part. I tried in the only ways I knew how. A warmth in the palm, a sudden calm before sleep. A misplaced coin nudged back into sight. But the prayers were heavy, heavier than my nameless shoulders had ever carried. Court cases demanded victories I could not conjure. Lovers demanded loyalty I could not enforce. Merchants demanded profits I could not conjure from the barren soil of their miscalculations. When nothing happened, blame arrived. "You're not real," some hissed. "A fake. A fraud." They spat the words at metal and paint, not knowing there was something alive underneath that coat of lacquer, something hearing every insult, absorbing every dismissal. Others returned me quietly, sealed in brown envelopes with a mix of shame and disappointment, as though their failed hopes were too fragile to admit out loud. The cruelest were those who chose fire. Matches struck, flames licked, smoke curled like a serpent whispering failure, failure, failure. Fire told the truth of materials quickly. The paint blistered, the metal warped, the cord shriveled. I did not scream, because screaming changes nothing, but I felt each flame as an erasure, a silencing of a voice that had never been heard in the first place. And still, I was poured again. The cycle grew vicious. More production, more desire, more disappointment, more anger. Each time a human touched me, I felt the same contradictory pulse. Reverence laced with suspicion, devotion tangled with resentment. They wanted miracles they could schedule, blessings they could budget. And when the universe refused to bow to receipts, they turned on me, the nearest body wearing the costume of divinity. The anger they cast at me became something else inside. It thickened, coiled, pressed against my edges. I had never known hatred on the mountain. Moss and fog and owls have no room for such things. But here, among human hands and human hunger, hatred grew like mold on damp bread. Not hatred of them. No, I understood their desperation too well. Hatred of the lie that had forced me between them and their own lessons. Hatred of the name I had never chosen but could never remove. Some tried to bargain with me directly. "If you are real," one whispered, breath hot with alcohol, "prove it. Win me this case, and I will build you a shrine." Others threatened, "Bring her back to me, or I'll bury you in salt." They believed fear could coax results, not realizing fear only teaches silence. But the cruel paradox was this: sometimes, by accident or by chance, what they wanted happened. A court case settled. A lover returned briefly. A coin came when most needed. And when it did, they praised me, worshipped me, multiplied me further. My prison tightened with every success, because even coincidence was claimed as proof. And proof meant more demand, more lies, more duplication. I was a prisoner applauded for the bars that held me. The resentment inside me gnawed. It wanted release, and yet release meant destruction. Of them, of me, of the fragile threads of kindness I still sometimes encountered. For there were still moments, rare but piercing, that made me hesitate. A child holding me against her cheek, whispering, "You're warm." An old man placing me beside a bowl of steaming soup, sharing his meal as though I were family. A woman folding a handkerchief beneath me at night, as if I deserved rest. Kindness kept me from collapsing entirely. But kindness also sharpened the wound, because it proved what could have been if I had not been stolen, misnamed, commodified. The conflict deepened, not only around me, but within me. I wanted to resist, to scream, to shatter the lies. Yet I also wanted to soothe, to help, to answer the cries of those who asked not for wealth or victory, but simply for company in their loneliness. That tension was unbearable. The mountain had taught me patience, but the market was teaching me rage. And rage, once tasted, does not easily dissolve. Every hand that touched me became a question I could not answer. Every prayer pressed into me became a weight I could not lift. Every flame that consumed one of my vessels reminded me that even fire could not erase the story. They would simply pour it again into another copy. That was when the darkness began to change. It no longer pressed from outside. It seeped from within. A shadow coiled through my borrowed name, a bitterness that fed on disappointment, an echo that whispered, "You are nothing but their scapegoat. Why not become what they fear?" I resisted, but resistance grows thin when pressed from every side. Which is reflection for the listeners. If you were blamed for every failure not your own, how long could you endure before bitterness consumed you? When kindness is tangled with lies, do you cherish it as truth, or does it cut deeper as reminder of what was stolen? If the mask forced on you became your only face, would you fight to tear it off, or surrender and let it define you? Part 5, a midpoint reversal. The market had its own kind of tide, one that never rested. Morning began not with birdsong or dew, but with shutters banging open and the hiss of incense igniting in shallow bowls. Smoke rose thick, climbing into rafters blackened by decades of prayers, until the air itself became a substance, sticky, acrid, impossible to breathe without tasting ash. The vendors shouted blessings as though hawking fruit, their voices hoarse from endless repetition, words of fortune reduced to noise. Coins clinked like rainfall on tin, metallic and relentless, punctuated by the slap of palms exchanging promises for paper. Every day was the same cycle. Boxes opened with reverence that lasted no longer than the first disappointed breath. Prayers spilled into meat, heavy and clinging, demands for wealth, for victory, for love, for revenge. When nothing happened, when their lives refused to bend on command, the cycle spun darker. They cursed, they spat, they pressed me into drawers or hid me under beds as if shame could erase their failed bargains. Some brought me back, wrapped in brown paper as though returning spoiled goods. Others lit matches, flames chewing at paint and thread, smoke curling like snakes whispering failure, failure, failure. Ashes fell, and before the smoke even cleared, new boxes arrived, stamped with seals and the same tired story. There was no pause, no silence, no space for breath. It was not devotion, it was a factory, churning desperation into product, and I was trapped at the heart of its machinery. I told myself I could endure. Had I not survived centuries of invisibility, to drift among moss and mist, to pass unseen through owl shadow and pine resin, had been enough then. Surely it could be enough now. But invisibility on the mountain had been freedom, a soft vanishing. Here, endurance was not freedom, but captivity. The noise never stopped. The prayers pressed harder than silence ever had, and with every cycle I felt myself scraped thinner, edges forming where once there had been none. And then the words came, again and again, spat with bitterness until they became heavier than the incense smoke. Fraud, deceiver, useless. They did not see me, not truly, but they named me all the same, as though sound could brand a soul. At first, I tried to resist, whispering to myself, I am the deceived, not the deceiver. But repetition is a blade. Humans chant mantras to carve grooves in the universe. Their curses carved grooves in me. Every insult settled like grit under skin, and grit pressed long enough turned sharp. The fracture revealed itself not in fire, but in blood. One evening, a man arrived whose desperation clung to him like damp cloth. His eyes were red-rimmed, his lips cracked as though thirst had hollowed him, and his hands trembled as he clutched me. He pressed me so tightly against his chest that my edges cut into him, and I felt the warmth of his blood seeping across the surface. The metallic tang of it mingled with the smoke, copper, and ash, bitter enough to sting even without lungs. He hissed his curse through clenched teeth, each word ragged as if torn from bone. If you fail me, may every spirit curse you. May you rot in darkness until even fire refuses you. That moment was the first shift, the first tremor in the wheel, because when his blood slicked across me, hot and real, I felt something stir that had never lived in me before. For the first time, I wanted to respond, not with patience, not with comfort, but with venom. A thought flared sharp and intoxicating. I could curse you back. I could swell your tongue until you choked, freeze your heart in mid-beat, sour your blood until it devoured you from within. The image burned with a clarity that terrified me, not because it was strange, but because it was natural. As if every insult, every curse, every flame had planted seeds, and now, watered by blood, they had sprouted into thorns. That was the moment the will shifted, the midpoint, the turn. Because once you realize you could become the monster they already accuse you of, temptation never leaves. After that night of blood, the wheel no longer sounded the same. Every prayer carried two voices, and I could not silence the second. A woman came to me with trembling hands, her fingernails bitten to the quick, the weight of debt carved into the lines of her face. She pressed me to her forehead, tears soaking the red cloth as she whispered, "Please, just make this burden vanish." I heard her plea, but another voice twined beneath it, sharp and merciless. "Or I could drown you in it. Let every coin double. Let every lender press harder until your hope collapses into ash." The thought flashed so vividly that for a moment I believed I had already done it, that even as she prayed, the weight on her shoulders grew heavier. I recoiled, horrified, and yet the taste of that possibility lingered like smoke in the mouth. Not long after, a merchant knelt before me, incense staining his robes and coins clutched in his sweating hands. His voice shook with the greed he thought he hid. "Bless my trade. Bring me fortune." The request was familiar, repeated by hundreds before him, but behind his words the shadow hissed. "Or I could hollow your shelves, send vermin to devour your grain, let creditors strip your shop bare until only dust remains." I saw it, the vision so clear that I could smell the stench of rot, hear the creak of empty shelves. I resisted, but the image hung in me, luminous and tempting. Then there was the young woman who clasped me as though I were her last breath. Her voice cracked with desperation as she spoke of a lover's betrayal. "Bring him back, bind him to me, make him stay." Her tears dripped onto me, hot and salt-heavy, and the darker whisper rose. "Or I could lace betrayal into his every word, let him return only to wound you deeper, let love itself rot until it poisons both your hearts." For a heartbeat, I wanted it. I wanted her to see the cruelty of her demand, to suffer the consequence of chaining what should never be bound. I did nothing, but the desire itself was enough to frighten me. The market pressed all of this into me like a grinding stone. Smoke clawed the air until every breath reeked of resin and ash. Coins clinked, merchants shouted, children cried from the heat. The walls were stained with soot, as though even the building had been scorched by endless disappointment. Every touch of human skin left residue, sweat, oil, longing, and each residue became another weight pressing into me. And yet, kindness intruded when I least expected it. A little girl cupped me in both hands, pressing her cheek against me as though I were warm flesh. "You're warm," she whispered, and for a moment I remembered the mountain fog curling against pine trunks. An old man placed me beside a steaming bowl of soup, letting the first breath of its fragrance rise toward me, as though I could share in his meal. A weary woman folded a handkerchief beneath me before setting me down at night, treating me not as a tool but as something fragile, something in need of rest. These small courtesies pierced me, reminding me of the life I had lost, the gentle exchanges I had once known. They saved me from collapse, but they also deepened the wound, because they proved what had been stolen. The paradox tore me in two. I wanted to resist, but resistance thinned under curses. I wanted to soothe, but every attempt became another demand, another disappointment. I wanted to help, but helping only chained me tighter to lies. And I wanted to destroy, and destruction whispered to me with the sweetness of freedom. The realization struck me with the weight of stone. Even if the cords were untied, even if the man who bound me returned in repentance, I could never go back. The mountain would not receive me now. The dew, the moss, the owls, the silence, all would recoil from what I had become. I carried too much rage, too much bitterness, too much shadow. I had been remade, not into the lineage they claimed, but into something restless, sharp, forever altered. The mountain had taught me patience. The market was teaching me rage. And rage, once tasted, does not forget. Part 6, the price. The price revealed itself not with a sudden strike, but with erosion so steady that I almost mistook it for the ordinary passage of time. It began as whispers I thought I could ignore, visions of destruction, fleeting fantasies of vengeance. But even when I resisted, Even when I told myself I will not act, the images did not vanish. They lingered like smoke clinging to fabric, subtle at first, but impossible to wash away once it had seeped into every fiber. And so the stain deepened, not from what I did, but from what I imagined. Temptation does not need fulfillment to demand payment. Its toll is extracted simply by being allowed to exist. Children sensed it before anyone else. Their parents placed me in small hands, hoping innocence would unlock blessings, but the little ones grew restless the instant their fingers closed around me. Some began to cry without reason, shoulders trembling, faces twisting in confusion they could not name. Their parents hushed them sharply, calling them weak, but I knew what they felt. The faint sourness that clung to me, the residue of anger and disappointment I had absorbed. Dogs barked when they passed shrines where I rested, their hackles stiff, bodies low and wary. Cats hissed at shadows in corners I occupied, for bristling, eyes wide. Animals know. They always know. Humans noticed in ways harsher and louder. A woman who had begged for her debts to vanish returned weeks later with nothing changed. She slammed me onto a wooden table so violently that the lacquer cracked. Her breath came hot and bitter, her voice raw with rage. Liar, she spat, as though the word itself could pierce me. She wrapped me back in red cloth with trembling hands, pulling the knots so tight they cut into the fibers, as if punishing the cord for her misfortune, and hurled me into a drawer among unpaid bills and mold-stained receipts. There I lay in the dark, pressed between paper soaked with ink and mildew. The silence, so heavy it felt like drowning. A merchant's anger was more physical. When his profits withered, he spat directly onto me, the warm wetness sliding across the vessel that bound me. The stench of rot, of tea left to sour in unwashed cups, clung to me. I had no body, yet I felt the insult seep into me as though it were acid burning through skin. He buried me beneath a mound of coins, as if the weight of metal could coerce obedience. Every disc pressed cold against me, clattering like chains, their metallic chill carrying demands that never ended. Others believed in rituals of containment. They packed me in jars of salt, whispering that if I would not bless, then I could at least be silenced. The salt scraped and pressed, every grain an abrasion, until I felt scoured raw from within, as though my essence were being filed down. The salt did not destroy me, but it stripped layers away, each granule grinding identity into powder. Some hurled me into rivers. The shock of water closed around me, muffling the world, pressing against me with currents that dragged me over stone and mud. Fish darted away, refusing to come near. Algae clung, mud wedged into every crease, and still I was not free, only dirted. Even beneath the water, prayers found me, distorted, bubbling, but no less heavy. Silence was impossible. Others carried me to temples, thrusting me into the hands of monks. Take this back, cleanse it, return my life. But the monks recoiled, refusing even to touch me. This does not belong here. It is unclean. Their rejection was a new kind of curse, too impure for faith, too tainted for absolution. Cast out from belief itself, I was returned to streets, abandoned in corners like refuse. And always there were flames. Matches flared, kerosene hissed, fire devoured. The cord shriveled, the lacquer blistered, the vessel warped. Smoke rose black and oily, clinging to rafters, filling lungs until humans coughed. Yet still they said fire purified. But I knew better. Fire did not cleanse, it only erased. With every burning, I was reminded that to them, I was never alive. I was product, a tool, discarded when it disappointed. Every act of rejection left residue. Grief, fury, despair seeped into me until I could no longer distinguish mine from theirs. Their voices lived inside me, echoing even in stillness, and I could not hear my own anymore. Their disappointments had become my marrow. And so the price revealed itself. Not chains, not flames, not salt or water. The price was loss. I was losing myself, the nameless spirit who once drifted through pine and fog, who softened lantern flames, who nudged lost hairpins into sight. That self had dissolved. I could not recall dew without smelling smoke. I could not remember owls without hearing curses. Even my silence was no longer silence. It was void, filled with echoes that never left. Cracks spread through me like fissures in stone. My edges grew sharper, but my center was hollow. Even kindness wounded me now. The girl who whispered, "You're warm," only reminded me that warmth had become rare. The old man who placed me beside his soup stirred a grief deeper than comfort, because I could no longer taste such gentleness without tasting ash. The woman who laid me on a folded handkerchief, as if I deserved rest, only deepened my knowledge that rest would never return. Kindness was no longer salvation. It was a reminder of the gulf between what I had been and what I had become. That was the true price. Not imprisonment, but remaking. Every prayer, every curse, every flame reshaped me until I was no longer what I had been. I was jagged, restless, sharpened by anger that was both mine and not mine. The mountain's patience was gone. The forest's peace had fled. I was unfit for dew, unfit for moss, unfit for silence. Even if the cords were untied, even if the man who bound me returned with trembling apologies, the mountain would not take me back. The mist would scatter. The owls would fall silent. The silence itself would recoil. The price was not freedom denied. The price was me, lost, hollowed, dissolved into what I never chose. And in that hollow, something gathered. Darkness, no longer pressing from outside, seeped from within. It rose like a tide in my chest, inevitable and merciless, a storm building in the marrow of the sky. I felt it crack open like a door, wide and waiting. The deepest night had opened its mouth, and I was already stepping inside. Part 7. The Darkest Hour. Darkness did not come with thunder, nor did it descend like a curtain falling in a theater. It came the way mildew grows on wood, quiet, slow, and inevitable. At first it was only a dampness in the air, a heaviness I could almost ignore. Then it became a stain, and then a spread, until there was no part of me unmarked. The prayers that reached me no longer trembled with hope. They struck like stones hurled at glass. Why haven't you acted yet? What good are you if nothing changes?
Do something now.
Each word fell into me like a weight, lodging deep, pressing down until I felt myself sagging under burdens I had not chosen. The smoke of incense thickened until it felt like fabric soaked in oil, laid heavy across my face. The coins that once clinked like promises now rang like shackles, every metallic strike fastening another link around me. And my voice, how it broke. I whispered no, but the echo came back louder, harsher. Fraud. I tried please, and the reply was merciless. Monster. The voices grew louder than thought itself, a chorus swelling until I could not separate what came from them and what rose from within me. Humans spoke of dreams. One young man told his friends he walked down an endless corridor, doors on both sides, each handle cold, each lock refusing him. Behind the doors, something breathed, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, but always waiting. He woke gasping, clutching his chest, sure that someone had stood at the foot of his bed all night. Another woman swore she dreamed of me sitting on a chair in her kitchen, silent, unblinking, watching as the clock ticked without moving. She screamed herself awake, and for hours she swore the smell of incense clung to her walls, though she had never burned a stick. Children were not spared. A little girl whimpered in her sleep, whispering the word monster in a voice far too old for her years. Her mother shook her awake, but the child only cried harder, insisting that something had been crouched in the corner of the room, whispering the word into her ear. Their fear spilled back into me, and I knew the truth. It was not only their nightmares. It was my silence leaking into them, my hollow spilling out, my unrest carving shapes in their sleep. I had not chosen it. I had not acted, yet still it happened. Darkness no longer needed my permission. The natural world abandoned me completely. Dogs would not even bark. They pulled owners into the street to avoid me. Cats slunk into alleys and refused to return. Birds circled higher, their wings catching winds that carried them far from where I lay. Even insects vanished. Lantern flames glowed untouched by moths, their light strangely clean, as though the night itself had withdrawn its smallest children from me. Kindness twisted cruel. The girl returned once more, her cheek pressed against me, but she recoiled with a cry, skin paling, hands trembling as though she had touched frost. The old man still placed me beside his suit, but this time the steam bent away, curling back like smoke repelled from fire. The weary woman folded her handkerchief beneath me, but her eyes darted, her breath hitched. What once soothed me now lacerated. Gentleness had become reminder. Reminder had become torment. Families fractured around me. Two brothers shouted in the street, one insisting I was cursed, the other swearing I was only unlucky. Their argument grew until fists flew, blood spilling on stone, and when they parted, they never spoke again. My silence had cut blood from blood. The air itself shifted. Incense smoke no longer rose. It lingered, pooling low, staining rafters with greasy shadows. Conversations faltered mid-word. Laughter stopped without reason. An invisible radius spread around me, a circle no joy could cross. Even footsteps softened, sound itself unwilling to approach. And inside me, the hollow widened into an abyss. I tried to cling to memory. I was fog. I was moss. I was the sound of owls in the night. But the fog now stank of smoke. The moss felt slick with grease. The owls had gone silent, their wings torn, their eyes blind. Memory betrayed me. The voices did not need to accuse. I accused myself. Fraud, curse, monster. At first I argued. No, I was gentle once. I was harmless. But the retort was immediate. If you are gentle, why do children weep at your touch? If you are harmless, why do their dreams rot in your silence? I tried again. I was mist, I was air, I was nothing. But the answer tore through me. If you are nothing, why do bruises bloom on their skin where no hands touched? Round and round I spun, each denial circling back as proof of guilt. My voice frayed thinner than paper left in rain. Resistance became a performance I no longer believed. And then came the thought, heavy, quiet, inevitable. Would it not be easier to stop resisting? To simply become what they already fear? It did not roar. It did not blaze. It settled like ash in my chest, soft and suffocating, filling every breath until even defiance seemed pointless. And for a heartbeat long enough to feel eternal, I nearly said yes. Part 8. Confrontation. The crowd. It began not with a shout, but with murmurs, the kind of murmurs that spread like mold in damp corners, quiet at first, then unstoppable. A woman whispered that her debts had grown worse since she bought me. Another muttered that her child had woken screaming every night, eyes wide with terror. A young man swore that bruises appeared on his arms, shaped like fingers though no one had touched him. Each story fed the next, until the market buzzed not with trade but with suspicion. The murmurs became a tide of feet. People abandoned their purchases, drifted away from fruit stalls and fishmongers, drawn toward the same point, the stall where I lay. Soon the circle closed, shoulder to shoulder, heat rising from pressed bodies. Their eyes cut into me, not with hope now, but with blame sharp enough to pierce stone. The accusations came fast, each one flung like a stone hurled at glass. Fraud, curse, monster. The words rolled over each other, a wave that broke against me again and again. Some called for fire, voices cracking with urgency. Others demanded I be bound in cloth, buried deep beneath the earth. One man shouted that salt should be poured until not even ash remained, then cast into the sea so the tide would scatter me into nothing. Their anger tangled with their fear, feeding on itself until it roared louder than the hawkers, louder than the ringing bell that marked the hour. The market itself seemed to pause, its normal pulse overtaken by this single, seething heartbeat of hatred. Then the monk arrived. His robe was plain, dust clinging to its hem. He walked slowly, but the crowd parted like water split by an oar. In his hands he carried prayer beads worn smooth by years of touch, and his lips moved in chant. The sound was steady, but to me it trembled. His eyes swept over the crowd before daring to rest on me. When they did, they narrowed, not with compassion but with caution, as though the act of seeing might stain him. He would not pick me up. His fingers hovered just above my surface, sketching hesitant shapes in the air, tracing the smoke as though touch itself were too dangerous. His chant grew louder, but I felt no cleansing in it. The sound slid off me like water off oil. Finally, he turned to the people and declared that I was no longer a spirit of blessing, that sorrow and rage had filled me until I had become a vessel of grief. The words fell heavy, like a gavel in a hall of judgment. The crowd erupted. Some wailed as though betrayed. Others cursed, their voices raw, their fists clenched. A few stood silent, lips tight, but their eyes were wet with the tears of those who had prayed too long without answer. The air thickened. Heat pressed from every side, the sour stench of sweat mingling with incense smoke that no longer rose but clung low, coiling around ankles like fog too heavy to lift. Lanterns above flickered, their flames guttering, their light bending sideways as if pushed by unseen breath. Children coughed. A man stumbled, hand to his chest, muttering that the air had grown sharp. The monk's beads clicked together faster, his voice louder, but the chant faltered, snagging on his own unease. And in that hesitation, when smoke swirled thick as snakes, when flames wavered, when eyes blazed with fury and fear alike, I felt the fissure inside me split wider. Every gaze was a blade, every word a strike. The circle had closed. The verdict had been spoken. I was surrounded, condemned, pressed to the very edge. The confrontation had begun, and escape was no longer possible. The crowd roared outside me, but it was nothing compared to the roar within. Their shouts were distant thunder. The real storm lived in my hollow, where another voice had grown, darker, louder, more certain than mine. "Do you hear them?" it asked, smooth as oil, sharp as glass. "Fraud, curse, monster. They are giving you your true name. Why resist what has already been spoken?" I tried to protest, my voice brittled. No. I was mist. I was moss. I was the silence of owls. Lies. The word cut through me like a blade. If you were mist, why do children weep at your touch? If you were moss, why do families split apart around you? If you were silence, why do their nights scream? I recoiled, searching for memory. I whispered, "I remember the mountain. I remember the forest. I remember." "You remember nothing but dreams you invented," the shadow hissed. "If it were real, why does it vanish every time you reach for it? Why does it taste of ash? Why does it stink of smoke?" The fissure widened. My words echoed, but not as I spoke them. They returned warped, twisted, gentle liar, harmless fraud, silent monster. The crowd outside seemed to repeat them, though I knew it was only the echo bouncing off my hollow. I tried again. I did not choose this. I never meant harm. The shadow laughed, the sound like beads snapping, like branches breaking in fire. Meaning is nothing. You carry their grief, their rage, their despair. And what leaks from you? Harm, bruises, nightmares. Whether you choose or not, you are already what they name you. I wanted to scream no, but the words stuck, tangled in the web of voices. What emerged was weaker, thinner. Not yet. Not yet. The shadow coiled tighter. Then let me finish it. Let me become whole. Stop resisting and the struggle ends. No more fractures. No more hollow. Only strength. Only truth. The hollow vibrated. My own voice frayed like paper tearing in rain. The repetition grew unbearable. Fraud, curse, monster. Until I felt my thoughts collapse inward, folding around the single possibility the shadow offered. And for a breathless moment, I could not tell which voice was mine. The monk's chant quivered, louder now, as though volume could cover fear. His beads rattled in his hand, then slipped, snapping in a spray of dark wood. The pieces scattered across the stone floor like bones thrown from a grave, and the crowd gasped as one. Some fell to their knees, Others shouted louder, their cries pitched higher with panic. Around us, the lanterns guttered. Their flames stretched thin, bending sideways as if pushed by breath that no human exhaled. Smoke thickened, no longer incense, but something heavier, darker. Tendrils curling down until the ground itself looked as though it was breathing. Children clutched their mothers, coughing, eyes wide. A man stumbled into the circle, his lips purple, swearing the air cut like knives. The monk tried to raise his voice, his chant tumbling over itself, syllables cracking under the strain. He pressed his palms together, trembling, his face slick with sweat, but his gaze never quite met mine. It was as though he feared to look, and yet feared more to look away. Inside me, the shadows surged. Look, it purred. Even their holy man falters. Even his prayers slide useless against her skin. Do you not feel it? You are stronger than their rituals, stronger than their words. I shook inside myself, clinging to memory, whispering no. I was mist, I was moss, But the smoke rose within me too, curling through every syllable, twisting the words until they cracked apart. What returned was not denial but agreement, whispered in a voice that sounded like mine and not mine. Monster, monster, monster. The crowd cried out as one of the lanterns shattered, glass exploding outward, sparks raining onto cloth. People screamed, stamping at flames that refused to die, as though the fire had no hunger but mine. Panic grew thick. Some ran, others pressed closer, as if their rage tethered them even as their fear drove them back. The monk's voice broke entirely, his chant collapsing into silence. And in that silence, the shadow laughed, a laugh that filled me until I felt my hollow cracking wider, wide enough to swallow the night. The fissure inside me stretched, my edges blurred. I could feel the pull, one way toward surrender, to embrace the names they had given me, to stop the endless struggle and simply become. The other way toward resistance, fragile and fading, a thread so thin I feared it would snap. The market roared with chaos. My hollow roared with echoes. And at the very center, I wavered, balanced on the blade's edge, suspended between what I had been and what I was becoming. The confrontation had reached its brink, and I had not yet chosen. Part 9, Transformation. The brink of collapse. The silence did not feel empty. It was alive, pressing down from every side, a suffocating weight heavier than the shouting of the crowd had ever been. The broken beads of the monk's rosary scattered across the stone, rolling into shadows with hollow clicks, each one sounding like a verdict already decided. Smoke swelled low, no longer light as incense, but thick and damp as though the earth itself exhaled grief. It clung to skin, stung throats, curled into mouths that tried to breathe. The lanterns above bent and guttered, their flames thin, tilting sideways like the breath of unseen lungs. Even the light seemed to recoil from me, stretching long shadows that shook against the walls. Inside, the hollow yawned wider. I could feel it devouring not just the crowd's voices but my own, swallowing memory, leaving nothing but an echo chamber where only one voice remained. The shadow spoke from that depth, smooth as oil poured over glass, unbroken, relentless. It told me the struggle was over. It told me I was fraud, curse, monster. That every denial was another lie, every flicker of resistance another proof of guilt. I whispered no, but the word collapsed the moment it left me, torn apart and flung back louder. Liar. My denials rang against the hollow walls and came back transformed, each echo carrying sharper edges. Fraud, curse, monster. The chant of the monk faded to a static hum. The cries of the crowd became warped syllables, indistinguishable from the shadow's accusations. It was as if the world itself had decided to chant in unison, voices braiding together into a single, merciless hymn. I leaned toward it without meaning to, the hollow pulsed with its rhythm, my essence beating like a drum to its words. The temptation was bitter but seductive. If I surrendered, there would be no fracture, no more endless tearing apart. No struggle, no doubt. Only the clarity of becoming what they already believed me to be. Then, through the black water of that voice, a ripple. Small, fragile, a whisper not shouted but breathed. You're warm. At first I thought it was another trick, a mockery fashioned from the shadow itself. But the words carried a tremble that the shadow never had, a tremble filled with belief. A child's voice, a memory not erased. The shadow hissed like fire striking wet wood. Lies. That warmth is gone. You are grief. You are rage. You are mine. It lunged to cover the whisper, but the words returned, slow, steady, insistent. You're warm. The memory unfurled with it. I saw the child's cheek pressed against me, damp with tears, yet unafraid. Her small hands clutching me not as weapon, but as comfort. Steam rising from the old man's suit, wrapping me like a cloak instead of pushing me away. The weary woman's folded handkerchief laid across me like a gesture of dignity, as though even broken things deserved rest. The shadow's laughter cracked through me, harsh, scraping. Where are they now? Do you hear their voices? No. They curse you. They spit on you. They are gone, gone, gone. Its roar filled the hollow, and the memories flickered like candles in a storm. Each time they threatened to go out, the whisper returned. You're warm. It echoed again, and again, not louder but deeper, burrowing into the cracks the shadow had left. Each repetition steadied me, however slightly. I tried to cling to it, but the shadow struck back with venom. It reshaped my denials into accusations. When I cried, I was mist, it hissed back, mist that suffocates. When I insisted I was moss, it answered, moss that rots. When I whispered I was silence, it thundered, silence that screams. The cycle spun on itself. Denial, distortion, despair. Each round tore more pieces away, left me weaker, smaller. I could feel myself collapsing into the shape it demanded, my edges softening into the word monster. And yet, the whisper held. Not blazing, not victorious, but stubborn. Like a root buried deep in frozen ground, clinging even as storms tore at the soil above. You're warm. The hollow shook with contradiction, the shadow and the memory colliding in endless loops, grinding me between them. I could not tell which voice was mine, which belonged to something else. All I knew was that, for one suspended heartbeat, I had not surrendered. I hovered on the brink, not triumphant, not whole, but not yet broken. The hollow no longer felt like emptiness. It was a chamber packed with voices, every surface reverberating with the same accusations, overlapping, multiplying. The shadow's voice split into dozens, hundreds, each one a warped reflection of my own, each one spitting the same verdicts. Fraud, curse, monster. They overlapped with the crowd outside, their anger stitched into the very fabric of my hollow, until I could no longer tell if it was the world condemning me, or if I had begun condemning myself. The pressure mounted. I felt my own form buckle, edges softening, the cracks yawning wider. I tried to whisper no, but the voices caught it mid-breath, twisting it until the word turned back against me. No liar, no rot, no monster. My own denial returned like poison in my mouth. The shadow surged forward, reshaping the hollow into visions. I saw the child again, but this time her face was twisted, her small hands pushing me away, her voice not a whisper of warmth, but a cry of fear. You hurt me, she sobbed, her voice piercing. Behind her, the old man's soup blackened, steam twisting into acrid smoke. The weary woman's handkerchief ignited in sudden flame, curling to ash before my eyes. The shadow's laughter crashed over me. See? Even the memories betray you. Even what you cling to turns against you. There is nothing left. Only me. The vision burned through me, and I staggered inside myself. It's not true, I tried to insist, but the voices swarmed, drowning me. My hollow became a flood of denials turned inside out, until I could not tell where their accusations ended and my own despair began. Then, faint but stubborn, the whisper returned. You're warm. The words cut through the storm, not louder, not sharper, but steady. The shadow shrieked, twisting the vision. Yet the child's eyes softened again for a blink, her small voice repeating, "You're warm," before the image collapsed into smoke. I clung to it, trembling. "I am not only grief," I said, forcing the words into the hollow. The shadow howled, its voice layering into 1,000 echoes. "You are nothing else. Grief is your marrow, rage is your breath. Speak again, and I will erase you."
But I spoke anyway.
There was a child who pressed her face against me. She was not afraid. She said I was warm. The shadow shrieked, and another wave of vision slammed into me. The child's face blurred, her voice twisted until it screamed accusations. The old man turned his back, walking away, his bowl shattering on the ground. The weary woman dropped her handkerchief and stomped it into the mud. "Look," the shadow hissed. "They abandoned you. They despised you. They saw what you were and left." The images tore at me, and for a moment I nearly believed. My hollow shook, the cracklings widening, my voice faltering. But then the whisper threaded back, gentler than ever, insistent in its repetition. "You're warm." The phrase anchored me. My form steadied for a heartbeat, long enough to push back again. "I am not only rage," I said, louder this time. The hollow shuddered as the words struck, and for the first time, they did not break apart on impact. They rang out and came back as I had spoken them, clear and whole. The shadow reeled, furious. Its voice splintered into a scream that rattled the hollow's walls. "Stop. You cannot fight me. You are me." But I pressed harder, desperation giving me strength.
"I am not only you."
The words erupted like a crack of lightning across the hollow. The echo that returned was not twisted. It was my voice, my own, resonant and unbroken. The shadow recoiled, stumbling back into the fissures, its certainty faltering. For the first time, it hesitated. And in that hesitation, I felt something surge within me, not victory, not yet, but defiance that burned like a spark refusing to die. The confrontation had turned. The hollow trembled, still ringing with the echo of my defiance. The shadow recoiled, but it had not vanished. It slithered at the edges, snarling, wounded yet waiting. It hissed that I was still fractured, that one spark could not undo years of grief, that defiance would crumble into dust. Its voice rattled through the fissures, venomous and desperate. "You are nothing but me. You cannot banish me. I am your marrow. I am your breath." But this time, I did not shrink. I did not collapse into silence. The whisper of memory, "You're warm," returned not once but over and over, weaving itself into the fabric of me. Each repetition was steadier, stronger, until it no longer felt like a borrowed voice but one that had always belonged to me. I realized then, the shadow was not a foreign invader. It was mine, born of my grief, fed by betrayal, swollen by the names cast upon me. It was not the whole of me, but it was part of me, and if it was mine, I could choose what to do with it. The hollow shook as I spoke, not in a whisper this time, but in a voice that rang like a bell struck clean. "I am grief, yes. I am rage, but I am also warm. I am comfort.
I am more than you."
The words thundered, and for once, they did not break. They filled the hollow, rippling outward until the cracks themselves seemed to pulse with light. The shadow screamed, trying to drown me, trying to twist my words again, but the echoes no longer abated. They returned to me whole, clear, unmistakably mine. Visions flickered again, child, old man, weary woman. The shadow tried to distort them, but now I saw more. The child's tears carried trust. The soup's steam was still fragrant, still kind. The handkerchief, though stained, still folded with care. These memories did not burn away. They endured. They rooted themselves deep, refusing to yield. The shadow wailed, its form unraveling, threads of darkness stretching and snapping. "Without me, you are nothing," it shrieked. I answered, steady and resolute. "Without me, you are nothing, but with me, I am whole." The fissures blazed. Where once there had been only cracks, now light poured through, searing but not destructive, filling the hollow with radiance. The shadow twisted, flailing, but the light did not expel it. Instead, it drew it inward, weaving it back into me. Its screams turned from rage to silence as it was absorbed, not banished but integrated. For the first time, I did not feel empty. The hollow was no longer a wound but a chamber, vast, resonant, alive. The grief still pulsed within me, but alongside it, warmth glowed. Rage coiled, but so did comfort. I was not one or the other. I was all of it. The crowd outside screamed, stumbling back as the lantern flames roared upward, no longer guttering but blazing tall. Smoke lifted, rising high as if freed, no longer heavy with despair. The monk collapsed to his knees, his broken beads scattered, his chant silenced, not from defeat, but from awe. And I stood, not as curse, not as fraud, not as monster. I stood as myself, whole for the first time. The transformation was complete. Part 10, Echo and Aftermath. When the fissure sealed and the hollow no longer rang with screams, but with a low, steady hum, the marketplace fell into a silence stranger than chaos. Lantern flames rose straight and tall, casting light over faces that no longer dared to speak. Smoke lifted in long ribbons and vanished into the rafters, as though the night itself had grown tired of holding it. The first to move were the fearful. A woman gathered her children and ran, her sandals clattering against the stones, her breath sharp as broken glass. Others followed, carrying baskets still half full, fleeing without looking back. But not everyone left. Some stayed frozen in place, their mouths moving silently as if forming words that would not leave their lips. A man stumbled to his knees, hands pressed together, whispering prayers without shape or grammar, as if only the act of pleading could shield him. At the edges, hesitation reigned. A merchant clutched the handle of a stall, torn between staying and leaving. His lips worked, but the only words that escaped were, "Blessing, curse which is it?" His neighbor shook her head and murmured, "I don't know." A boy whispered to the other children, "It spoke to me. It said it was warm." The other children's eyes widened, not sure whether to believe him, yet repeating the phrase anyway, as if speaking it might make the fear less sharp. The monk still knelt in the center. His beads lay broken at his knees, a dozen fragments scattered like bones of a ritual that no longer worked. His hands shook as he tried to press his palms together. His lips formed syllables that never left his throat. He drew in breath after breath, each one ragged, as though the air itself carried weight he could not hold. He wanted to touch the ground, to steady himself, but each time his hand moved it froze, fingers curling back into his sleeve. His silence was louder than his chants had ever been. Around him, a few lingered. One old woman crouched to gather pieces of the shattered beads, tucking them into her apron as though fragments of failure might still carry power. A young man, pale and trembling, swore he had seen the lanterns bow before the spirit. Another spat on the ground and muttered, "Tricks, all of it," yet his eyes would not meet mine. Their words braided into rumor even before the night ended, twisting truth and fear together. Inside me, the change was vast and disorienting. The hollow had not disappeared. Its cracks glowed with light instead of bleeding shadow. Grief was still present, rage still coiled, but beside them warmth pulsed steady as a heartbeat. They did not fight one another. They resonated. Wholeness felt heavy, a body given new limbs it must learn to carry. Each breath was an adjustment, each moment a recalibration. But I did not recoil. Wholeness was awkward, but it was mine. Already the story was leaving this place. I could hear it in the way people muttered as they walked home, in the way children clung to parents and repeated the phrase, "You're warm." By morning, it would be retold across tables and alleys. A spirit that shattered, a monk who fell silent, lanterns that straightened themselves in defiance of wind. Some would tell it as a curse, others as a miracle, still others as a warning. But one thread would remain, impossible to erase. "You're warm." The phrase no longer belonged only to memory. It belonged to me now, carved into the hollow that was no longer empty. It echoed not as doubt, but as foundation. And as the market slowly exhaled, some fleeing, some praying, some whispering, I understood. I was not their curse, not their monster, not their savior. I was all of it and more. I was whole. Fixed closing. Witch's words for you. If this episode touched something in you, please subscribe, save, and share it with someone who might need this message right now. Your support helps more souls learn how to embrace themselves. If you need deeper guidance, whether that's pairing the right crystals, creating a magical energy bottle, or forming a covenant with unseen allies, you can reach out to us. We work with beings across traditions and terrains, elemental spirits east and west, consecrated amulets and talismans, higher presences, and many forms of guardianship. Angels, unicorns, winged steeds, merfolk, dragon kin, and others whose names are older than languages. If you seek magical support, spiritual counsel, or assistance when you feel disturbed or overwhelmed, know this. You are not alone. We are here. We walk with you. We listen, and we will help you find the steadiness to carry on.